name is Timothy, the Laughing Child Farm. In practice, I could get this in 25 minutes. It's going to be, I'll go quick, and it's going to be kind of like a little data dump on you guys, but we'll, again, the last slide's got my email if you want to email me or catch me afterwards. I guess what I want to say is that, so this is kind of based for commercial growers. If you're a home grower, I think you can still get something out of this. So Vermont has challenges and benefits to growing sweet potatoes. Some of the benefits to growing sweet potatoes in Vermont is we have fewer insect pests, less disease because there's not as many sweet potatoes being grown in the state, and of course more Vermonters are eating locally, and there's more people are eating sweet potatoes, which is a good thing. The challenges really come down to the tight window of your harvest window. There's plenty of other things that feed on other crops that grow adjacent to the sweet potatoes that can get on your sweet potatoes and mess around with them. And just like with popcorn, there's not a nexus of readily available equipment specifically designed for harvesting sweet potatoes or working with sweet potatoes. That can be a challenge. And probably the biggest challenge is that your slips, some of the best slips are being produced in North Carolina, and then to be shipped up here, it takes 3 days. And they're not, once you cut them, you really should have them in the ground within 3 days. This slide here is like the thesis of what I'm going to try to tell you today, and that's most of the work of getting nice sized roots happens before you ever plant. We plant in June, but the work is all done in May. And sweet potato fertility, I put up some sources of potassium on the side. Make note of that. The cheapest source of potassium is going to be that wood ash, but you have to buy a truckload of it. If you're looking for smaller amounts, that sulfate of potassium is going to be a good locally available source in smaller quantities. But your typical ratio when you blend your fertilizers, anything between 1, 2, and 3 to 1, 4, and 6. The soil tests, in Vermont are not going to be based, they don't have a little box for sweet potatoes. So you're going to be looking to get about 200 pounds per acre of your potassium on your field based on your soil test. So, and then, for the nitrogen is a little tricky. I don't want to recommend too much nitrogen, but just a touch more than what they recommend in the soil test gets a better potato. Or you get higher yields on the potatoes. But too much is going to cause problems. And then, of course, your boron and magnesium are important for sweet potatoes, but really, that should be based on your soil tests. So back to May, this is what you should not do. And you can see in the foreground, we're laying plastic. And in the back, we're actually planting sweet potatoes. Unfortunately, these beds I'm laying now are not going to be planted for another 3 weeks. And the ones that where we're planting had about 4 weeks of time. 4 weeks to sit in the sun and get the soil up to the right warmth. And that's going to be important because when you're planting sweet potatoes, the planting conditions need to be ideal, and so that's why you're waiting a month between laying plastic and planting, so you have maximum soil warmth. Some of the conditions you want to look for, so I have planting the slips as soon as they come in, so scheduling that. The initial 10-day period is going to be the most important part of the sweet potato's life, I feel. And that's why all that work's done ahead of time. If there's hailstorms or inadequate moisture in that 10-day period, or a frost, or animals are coming down off the mountain and eating your sweet potatoes, or the tops, that's going to set them back, really hurt things. And the dates, I wouldn't say earlier. I'd say earlier is not better. I get some calls about I didn't plant my sweet potatoes till June 20th. I don't think that's a problem. I think there's plenty of time to get a nice sized root on your sweet potato if you have everything else prepared. If you have the good conditions. In fact, I think that June 20th potato. The weather seems to stabilize later in June. In early June, I feel like, at least where we are, we get hailstorms and that stuff sort of blows through. And the potatoes that we planted in late June last year ended up being some of the largest potatoes we pulled out of the ground. It's the timing of after you've laid your plastic is going to be most important, and waiting for the weather to warm up. So if you're not in a warm spot, wait till late June. So this is I just want to, in case you haven't seen sweet potato slips before, those are them in the boxes. My wife Brooke, she takes all the photographs, so that's why I'm in every photograph, but she does as much work as I do. It just looks like I'm the only person doing anything. So sweet potatoes come in a box like that. You got to keep them cool. They don't look very good when they come in. Because they've been in the mail for 3 days, you got to get them in the ground. I anticipated there would be some questions about slip spacing. There's a relationship between the length of your season and the distance between your plants. And there's also, of course, there's a relationship between the distance between your plants and your yield and your number one yield. And that's, if you're a commercial grower, you're going for those number ones, which are not too big and not too small, and they have beautiful skin. What we find works for us is the 2 rows on 5-foot plastic. We plant, the rows are about 16 inches apart, and plants are spaced every 15 inches. The tighter the spacing, the higher the overall yield, but you reduce your number ones. We are probably going to go down to, if we can get our harvesting system down a little better, we're going to decrease our size. Like George was saying, he can harvest in 2 hours. It takes us eternity to harvest. And but the nice thing if you're a home grower is that any root that you grow from your sweet potatoes is going to be edible. And I just want to give you an idea of what that looks like on the ground. Again, it's me working. And those slips are Carolina rubies. One thing we might do, we kind of planning on doing this year, is throwing out some of the weaker slips. Carolina ruby is a variety that we grow. They're not very good. They don't come. They're not very. A Beauregard will come and it'll be as thick as your pinky. These are much more delicate. We might throw some of those out. They actually did pretty good this year, even planting some of the weaker things. But those are pretty weak ones. We're kind of filling in beds there. And I want to go, if I went back to that slide, I'd say that, we plant with the water wheel transplanter. That helps us, that helps the soil moisture as we're putting the slip in the ground. A little bit of liquid fish in there. I feel like it gives them a good start, but at least there's no roots on it at all, and so you kind of need it to good soil contact to spread out the roots, get the roots running. Some other considerations that I would add, we're going to just do this real quick because this is a little bit about farming and not about sweet potatoes specifically. But I did some trials, black plastic versus IRT, which is I feel like because we're kind of later in the season, the IRT doesn't have the gain. The black plastic, it's about equivalent. But if you're trying to burn out weeds or something, you might try the IRT. The weed control in holes is going to be pretty significant. You need to make sure that you're not, those aren't competing. They're susceptible to those weeds growing when they're just little plants. The weeds will grow faster than your sweet potatoes. So be prepared for that. Cultivation, the only thing I need to say about that is that you don't want to run over the tips of your plants. That will set them back too. If you're, this is all if you've got enough time. If you live in Texas, it's probably, I'd probably run over my plants and harvest later. Deer deterrence is going to be important. We use 3D fence with apple scent, and then we deploy pie pans, at a certain stage in the season. I have a friend down the road who uses 8-foot blueberry netting effectively, and so there's options there. 2 lines of drip tape is, I think it's going to be most important for that early root set. You want to maintain soil moisture during that initial 10-day period, and actually into like the 30-day period. Overwatering is going to be going to be a detrimental impact on the potatoes. They'll split and then they'll heal over, but they won't look very good. You're not going to get number ones by overwatering. And in general, it's like, depending on your flow rate, about 3 hours a week gets you through most of the season. It gets hot and drier, maybe a little longer. Drip tape underneath the plastic. There's not much you're going to be able to. We don't have a way of controlling these other than cover crops and crop rotation. Wireworms are probably the most problematic one, and that but you have to have a good crop rotation. You don't plant into sod. Have a good we're shooting for a 3-year crop rotation. Before the sweet potatoes are back on that same soil, you might need a little longer with some of the viruses. And your viruses, your scurf and your leopard virus there, that's going to come in on your seed stock. So make sure when you're buying slips, and I should go back in case anybody's, when you're planting sweet potatoes, it's not like planting potatoes. You're planting that plant, the top of the plant. That should be coming from a G1 or G2 seed source. So if it says they're G3 or down below, you're getting riskier. And then the real work starts is harvesting sweet potatoes. So this is kind of how we do it on our farm. There's other ways of doing it. Deciding when to harvest. We try to do it based on size, but really the weather is the most important factor. We need to commence harvest early enough that we can get everything out of the ground before it gets too cold. If you harvest we try to harvest on warm days. If you harvest on cold days, you pull the potatoes out of the ground, they crack. It's called air cracking. You split right down the middle. You have to throw those away. And so you want to, if you're harvesting below 50 degrees air temperature and soil temperature, potatoes can get down that cold. They're going to have chilling injury, which can cause storage problems, but most likely surface pitting. And then so sometimes if we're kind of up against the cold weather, so the reason that some of those potatoes that we planted late June were getting so big is I didn't want to mow the tops down. Because they'll insulate, the tops will insulate if the weather gets cold. And so if you're getting a frost, that's 32. The soil's still got some heat to it, but you're running out of time. I wanted to insulate the soil a little bit, and so the potatoes were getting bigger, up to the point of like a 4-pound potato. They were getting big there. But ideally, we go out in the field, we dig a couple random plots to find out where we have our maximum number ones, where most potatoes are number ones. We do try to mow the vines when we're going to harvest, mostly because that kind of helps set the skin a little bit, but 3 to 7 days before harvest. And some people try to increase the size or increase the size of the potato by covering with row cover. That's something that we don't feel necessary where we are, but it's also a little bit cost prohibitive for our scale. So if we don't have big potatoes, if your potatoes aren't sizing up by August, I don't know if there's really much you can do. But you can extend your harvest by covering them, I guess, if you got an early frost or something. Yeah, quick question there.
Are people putting the row cover on all season or just at the end?
There's some different trials, studies done with covering row cover. I think Justin, who's a sweet potato grower over here, I think he feels like the sweet potatoes don't do well underneath the remay early season. I think I've heard him say that before. They don't really like. I guess I wouldn't recommend covering them early season. It gets too hot and. Yeah, so he's saying it's way too hot underneath. Yeah, so I wouldn't. Yeah. Yeah, it'd be good to take it off and put it on. I wouldn't leave it. I wouldn't put it on. They did a study where they were trialing it, and they left it. They did one where they didn't cover it, and then the other one they just covered it and left it on. And the potatoes underneath the remay didn't do well, but like nobody would really do that. I don't think. Cover it and leave it on. Oh. So when we're harvesting, the first step is for us to remove the vines. Mostly that's done just by bending over and pulling up. You just pull up. We've also done it with machetes and corn knives, where you're rolling the bed, rolling the tops over and cutting. You're trying to cut parallel to the soil, so you're not cutting in. Most of the potatoes are going up a little bit above the soil, so you can't hit them with the machete. I find the most effective thing to do is hand pull, but it is very physically demanding. Clippers works too, but that's very slow. It takes us about 1 human hour to go about 500 feet to strip a bed of the vines and the plastic. We didn't take very good pictures this season, so we don't use this kind of digger anymore. We end up just once we strip the beds of the vines and the plastic, we come through with an undercutter bar and pick up the roots. But we've used, I can see this working on other farms. A digger like this in a wider bed, you can get underneath, keep the soil on the chain, and that way they don't scuff. You also have to be very careful of any materials you're putting on, or any making sure your vines aren't still attached to your sweet potatoes. If you're using a digger like this, they get caught up, bound up, and it'll scuff the skin right off. And then on that machine there, we had a padded chain help soften the blow of the digger. And of course, I've heard of people shoveling and digging forks on smaller. But the potatoes definitely are kind of cemented in the ground after a season of growing. And bigger when we use that digger, we actually wouldn't clear the plastic or the vines. It would just everything would come up over it, and then you'd have to sort everything afterwards. It's a little bit faster. That's kind of the trick of everything is. The handling during the harvest is going to be, where the money is made, I think. Field grading is important on a commercial level. The small potatoes don't cure well. Anything that's like long, stringy, rat-like, anything that's too thin is going to dry out in storage. It's going to lose moisture. But the skin is, when you harvest a sweet potato, the skin is very sensitive. So I give my employees cotton gloves, and they wipe every potato down, but it also keeps their fingers intact. But that way they're not scraping off the skin of the sweet potato as well. So anything where there's a scratch or cut is going to be open to disease, visually unappealing after it's cured, and then opens it to moisture loss. Cut potato should exude the latex. It should be a white a white latex that exudes out of that and heals over. So anything that you need to cut, there's some debate about cutting a bite. Sometimes the rats will bite the top of it, you can cut it off, or the deer will come down off the hill and chew it up, or the tractor will hit it, and you can cut that part off. And the debate is whether or not that causes more problems in storage by introducing, a place where, an entry into the potato. We do cut, we only cut the biggest potatoes. We only cut the jumbos, because everything else is not quite worth it. And then, during handling, so I have my daughter there, she's dumping sweet potatoes into a bin. When we, what people, employees want to do is they want to just dump the bucket. They're like, oh, this is like rock picking. It's not. You have to have you gently put every potato in the bin, and then you put a hand on top of your potatoes, you put them down in, and then slowly take your bucket off. That way they're not peeling and bruising as you're harvesting. So that's very important. Because any place where you've nicked the skin or scratched it, that's going to be a soft spot on the potato later. And then I just want to mention when you pack your bins, and you go to stack them, you have this first bin there has some potatoes piled up. It's not going to be a bottom bin. You stack them, you got to make sure you don't overload them, because when you stack them, it's a pyramid shape. All the weight kind of gets spread out amongst all the potatoes. So you're not just ruining the potatoes are getting set on, you're ruining your whole bin. So and then driving to and from the fields, it's not a joyride, it's very slow, because you're going to bruise the potatoes if you hit every bump. So your roads to and from your fields are going to be important for quality. So these are a picture of some of our jumbos. I didn't know it was going to be so high. I guess I was going to try to point some of these out. Maybe I can do it with a mouse. Point out some things you're looking here. Does that show up there? Yeah. So right there is a harvest scar, like something happened there. Also, and right next to it's another spot. Just some little nicks and scratches that made these potatoes go from a number 1 to a jumbo. And then you can see this is what a cut looks like. There's a cut here. Nice, the latex exudes out of there, heals over. It's a good spot. All right, we'll quickly run through these. You need to bring the core of your bin up to 85 degrees as soon as possible. And you need to hold it there for at least 3 days. So that whole process can take 7 to 14 days to get it up there. During that time, humidity needs to be 85%. If you're in there for too long, you're going to have moisture loss and sprouting. Then they get kicked out to the storage room. You need to drop the temperature to 55, keep high humidity, and air circulation. If you get the temperature wrong, like 60, 65 degrees, you're going to have sprouting again, which makes an ugly potato. I just want to quickly, how we wash and grade pretty heavily at Laughing Child Farm is how we wash. We just have a brush washer and a little bit of hosing, and we grade them on the other end. Number 1's jumbos. Last year we did fancies. This year we're cutting that out. Yeah, maybe. I can get there.
Can you post some, do you have any thoughts on sweetness? And making sweet potatoes sweeter? I know that's kind of one of the challenges that.
Yeah, so that's going to be largely genetic and your storage conditions. So, just by the fact that September potato is not going to taste as good as a December potato because of the length of storage. So your curing does a good bit of converting it to sweetness, but the curing is going to be extending the length it's going to be in storage. So I just want to put up a couple resources there. It's got my email address if you guys want to shoot me some questions. But then some other opportunities for around the country of good sweet potato information. So, all right, thanks.